Introduction. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we take a deep dive into the life of Susan Dey, the stunning actress who rose to fame as Lori Partridge in the Partridge Family. With her natural beauty, undeniable talent, and quiet charm, Susan captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. But beyond the bright lights of Hollywood, her journey was filled with unexpected turns, hidden struggles, and major career decisions that shaped her legacy. From her early modeling days to television superstardom, from on-set challenges to high-profile relationships, and from career highs to her ultimate departure from the industry, Susan Dey's story is one of both triumph and mystery. Join us as we uncover the fascinating life of a woman who was truly more than just a pretty face. Childhood and family. Susan Dey was born on December 10, 1952, in Pekin, Illinois. She was raised in a family with a strong artistic influence, as her mother, Ruth Dey, was a nurse, while her father, Robert Smith Dey, worked as a newspaper editor. Unfortunately, Susan experienced a significant loss at a young age. Her mother passed away when she was just 8 years old. After her mother's death, Susan and her siblings were raised by their father, who instilled in them a love for literature and storytelling. The family later moved to Bedford, New York, where Susan attended Fox Lane High School. Despite facing personal hardships, Susan developed an early interest in modeling and acting, which would later pave the way for her success in the entertainment industry. Her environment might have shaped her aspirations. Though her father, Robert Smith Dey, was a newspaper editor, one might wonder how his career introduced Susan and her siblings to the world of reading, writing, and the broader media landscape. Her dad was a newspaper editor, so she probably grew up comfortable with words and storytelling, skills that definitely helped in Hollywood. The loss of her mother at the tender age of 8 was undoubtedly a formative event. Coping with grief, especially as a child, can imprint a person with a sense of vulnerability, resilience, or both. In interviews given by people who knew Susan, they often describe her as quiet and somewhat reserved, yet with a deep emotional undercurrent. That subtlety in her personality might have been something directors and producers found particularly compelling, as many of her early roles often featured characters with depth, grace, and a certain softness. When the Dey family moved to Bedford, New York, this relocation not only offered a fresh start after the tragedy but also placed Susan in proximity to Fox Lane High School, a place that would be integral to her teenage years. Bedford is relatively close to New York City compared to a location like Pekin, Illinois, so the possibility of stepping into a modeling career was more tangible there. Indeed, many aspiring models from suburban areas around NYC find opportunities to do small photo shoots, appear in local ads, or sign with agencies looking for new faces, especially in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the modeling industry was booming, with agencies like Ford Models and Wilhelmina Models scouting new talent. Even in her high school days, Susan is said to have had an air of sophistication about her, tall, slender, and with the kind of face that cameras love. This wasn't the era of social media or online auditions. You either mailed physical headshots or literally walked into agencies. Susan's path from a teenager in upstate New York to modeling success imply that she must have been proactive, or at least open to the opportunities that came her way, even if she was described as quiet by those who knew her personally. One point that's seldom emphasized is the role of siblings in her life, especially after her mother's passing. The original text mentions that Susan was raised alongside her siblings by her father, but doesn't go into detail about her relationships with them. Were they also interested in the arts? Did they support her pursuit of modeling? While we don't have extensive public interviews of her siblings, we can guess that Susan's father and siblings could have played a stabilizing role in her life. A support system, especially for a child who had lost a mother, could be crucial for building the confidence needed to step in front of cameras and later, millions of television viewers. Susan Dey, more than a pretty face. Let's be real, nobody's life is perfect, especially in Hollywood. The industry often sells us romanticized narratives, whether through press releases, interviews, or even the carefully curated personal images celebrities present to the public. Susan Dey's statement that she never experienced a single failure or scandal could strike some as a bold claim. How could someone navigate decades in show business, an environment rife with sensational headlines, paparazzi culture, and intense competition, and maintain a spotless image? Perhaps what Susan truly meant is that she managed to avoid the major pitfalls that so many child stars and teen idols fell into: substance abuse, repeated run-ins with the law, or well-publicized financial disasters. But her claim does prompt a deeper question: was her life truly devoid of struggles, or was she simply more private than many others in her sphere? Indeed, one of the reasons Susan garnered respect in Hollywood circles was her discretion. She was never the type to chase tabloids or leak stories about her love life. Her circle of friends often described her as someone who valued her own personal dignity and the dignity of others. This sense of personal integrity might be one key factor that kept her from the sort of controversies other actors have faced. However, behind the quiet exterior, we can't discount the emotional challenges that might have come her way. From the pressure of being a young star to heartbreaks and professional disappointments, what we perceive as no scandal might simply have been her strong sense of privacy protecting her from negative publicity. Hollywood watchers might also recall that earlier eras of show business had studio systems or publicists who would vigorously protect an actor's image, controlling the release of information. While the era of the Partridge Family was a bit past the heyday of old Hollywood's ironclad studio system, publicists and managers still worked diligently to keep young stars in a certain light, especially an actress who represented wholesome family programming. Early life and career beginnings. Let's expand on how Susan Dey's modeling career may have helped land her the role of Lori Partridge and how she navigated her early days on set. At 17 years old, being thrust into a major network production like The Partridge Family would be nerve-wracking for most people. She had not only to learn how to act in front of a camera but also to adjust to the broader demands of working with a large cast and crew, dealing with the press, and performing in musical sequences, even if, in reality, not every actor in The Partridge Family was performing live vocals or instruments. While the show's storyline cast her as a musically gifted older daughter, behind the scenes, Susan had to quickly adapt. She was working with established personalities like Shirley Jones, already a famed Oscar-winning actress, and David Cassidy, who would soon become a teenage heartthrob of epic proportions. In the early 1970s, The Partridge Family soared in the Nielsen ratings, showcasing not only comedic domestic adventures but also producing actual music that topped the charts, I Think I Love You being the prime example. It wasn't just a TV show, it was a full-on phenomenon, with real hit songs topping the charts. For Susan, the transition from an unknown high school student in Bedford, New York, to a nationwide TV star was sudden. She had to learn public relations, how to handle interviews, sign autographs, and keep up with the breakneck pace of production schedules. If you can imagine a typical day, it likely included early morning calls to set, long hours of filming scenes, costume fittings, sometimes even filming musical sequences or promotional spots, and ending the day with script reviews for the next round of filming. It's an intense environment for any teen, and yet she did it with an air of grace. An interesting point worth noting is how the show's popularity impacted her personal growth. Many teen actors find it challenging to separate their personal identity from the roles they play, especially when their big breakout character is iconic. Was Susan Dey essentially living a parallel life, her own teenage milestones overshadowed by Lori Partridge's experiences? Possibly so. She had to keep up with her TV persona during interviews and fan events, which often painted her as the sweet, talented, and somewhat modest girl next door. Meanwhile, she was still developing her real personality off-camera, dealing with normal teenage insecurities, relationships, and an ever-watchful public eye. And let's not forget the monetary aspect. A young star could suddenly find themselves with a stable income far surpassing what an average teen would earn at a part-time job. Managing money, taxes, and professional representation often becomes a crash course in adulthood. For Susan, these new responsibilities likely accelerated her maturity. And while that can be exciting, it can also be overwhelming. Throughout this period, Susan was able to rely on certain mentors on set. Shirley Jones, who played her on-screen mother, was known to be supportive, having had plenty of experience in both stage and screen musicals. David Cassidy, her on-screen brother, was only a few years older but had been around show business. His father was the well-known singer and actor Jack Cassidy, and his stepmother was Shirley Jones. However, that dynamic also led to various complexities, especially when personal feelings entered the mix, a topic we'll explore in detail later. By the time The Partridge Family ended after 4 seasons, Susan had effectively become part of television history. It's impossible to mention 1970s pop culture without referencing the show's significance, from the bright bus to the memorable theme songs and the iconic family dynamic. While the show's premise might seem quaint by modern standards, it had a massive influence on how networks approached family sitcoms that integrated music. Indeed, series like The Monkees in the late 1960s had paved the way, but The Partridge Family took that concept to new heights, especially in merchandising, lunchboxes, board games, and teen magazines plastered with Susan Dey's and David Cassidy's faces were everywhere. Film career and later success. One of the hallmark films from Susan Dey's career in the early 1980s is Looker, 1981, a somewhat cult classic sci-fi thriller conceived by none other than author and filmmaker Michael Crichton. Even if you've never heard of Looker before, you've likely encountered Crichton's other contributions, such as Jurassic Park, Westworld, or ER. He had a flair for blending futuristic technology with gripping, and sometimes unsettling, narratives. Looker fits this pattern perfectly, delving into an eerie premise where high-fashion models are digitally scanned to create flawless virtual avatars for TV commercials. At its core, the film tackled ideas about corporate manipulation and the pursuit of physical perfection, effectively foreshadowing our modern-day debates about AI-generated images and digital retouching. While Looker might not have earned unanimous praise from critics, some found its storyline a bit outlandish. It has since gained a certain cult following. Fans of classic sci-fi appreciate how the film anticipated ethical questions concerning data privacy and visual technology. Within that context, Susan Dey brought her own distinctive presence to the screen, portraying a model caught in the middle of ominous corporate schemes. Compared to her earlier roles, this project presented a stark tonal shift. Gone were the breezy, musical vibes of The Partridge Family. In their place was a moody, suspense-laden storyline that demanded a more adult, mysterious quality. For Susan, stepping into a Crichton project was a creative gamble that could help her break out of the teen idol box. In her performance, she had to embody both sophistication and vulnerability, since her character undergoes a series of unnerving experiences that highlight the dark side of the modeling industry. The film relies on atmosphere, tension, and the discomfort of body commodification, something you don't see every day in mainstream 1980s cinema. While the box office numbers weren't record-shattering, the film's subsequent cult status has spurred more viewers to discover it over the years, often leading them to realize just how well Susan Dey handled complex material. In addition to Looker, some sources mention that Susan Dey had roles or cameo appearances in Sandy and in Grease, though the specifics can be murky and debated among fans. It's quite possible that some of these references might stem from promotional tie-ins or confusion with other titles from that era. Nevertheless, the mere mention of Grease brings us to a fascinating what-if scenario in Hollywood history. The original star of Grease was the beloved Olivia Newton-John, who famously played Sandy Olsen. But well before Grease, Olivia Newton-John had received an offer to portray Lori Partridge in The Partridge Family. She turned it down, assuming the show would struggle to find its audience. Little did she know it would become a massive hit, catapulting David Cassidy and Susan Dey into superstardom. If Olivia had become Lori Partridge, we might never have seen Susan Dey emerge in quite the same way, or maybe not at all. That's one of the incredible things about Hollywood. A single casting decision can alter multiple careers in unpredictable ways. Thus, when we talk about Susan Dey's film career, we can't forget the winding path of showbiz, where unexpected twists, last-minute casting changes, and personal instincts lead to iconic roles, or near misses that become legendary what-if tales. Susan Dey's leap from teenager on a musical sitcom to a grown woman taking on varied film projects signals her willingness to embrace risk. She could have easily stayed typecast as the wholesome girl next door, but she ventured outside that familiar zone to explore roles in different genres, sci-fi thrillers, comedies, TV movies, and more. This evolution, while exciting, also arrived with its own set of challenges. Moving from ensemble musical comedy to a Michael Crichton thriller meant adapting to a whole new style of direction, often requiring more serious emotional gravitas than the comedic, airy tones she was used to. However, the real turning point for Susan Dey's professional momentum occurred when she joined the cast of L.A. Law. Debuting in 1986, LA Law represented a bold new concept for legal dramas on primetime television. Created by Stephen Bochco, the mind behind other trailblazing series such as Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue, and Terry Louise Fisher, the show prioritized morally nuanced storylines, strong ensemble performances, and social relevance. Rather than offering a purely black-and-white depiction of court cases, LA Law delved into complex moral dilemmas, showing lawyers struggling with personal and professional crises. Within this framework, Susan Dey's character, Grace Van Owen, was no mere sidekick or pretty face in the office. Grace began as a deputy district attorney before eventually becoming a judge. This role required Dey to communicate authority, conviction, empathy, and a dose of ambition. Audiences immediately noticed her refined portrayal. The once fresh-faced teen star had blossomed into a serious actress capable of delivering emotional depth and intellectual heft. Critics responded in kind. The performance drew 3 Emmy nominations and 6 Golden Globe nominations, culminating in a Golden Globe win in 1988, a moment that firmly established Susan Dey as a legitimate dramatic actress. For fans who grew up watching her as Lori Partridge, seeing her command a courtroom on national television was thrilling and surprising. The contrast underscored her range, breaking down any lingering skepticism about whether she had staying power beyond that initial wave of teenage fame. LA Law itself broke ground for future legal dramas, influencing shows like Law and Order, The Practice, and even more modern entries such as Suits. Where older legal dramas often followed a rigid procedural format, LA Law embraced serialized storytelling and wasn't afraid to address provocative social issues like sexual harassment, discrimination, and ethical misconduct within the legal system. Susan Dey's character was at the heart of some of these arcs, grappling with sexism in a male-dominated environment and coping with the toll that a high-pressure legal career takes on one's personal life. During her run on LA Law, Susan Dey simultaneously developed a whole new fan base. This crowd largely had no memory of her earlier success in the Partridge Family. They knew her only as Grace Van Owen, the elegant attorney wielding piercing arguments in front of a judge. That divide between younger fans who adored her as Lori and adult viewers who recognized her from the courtroom drama indicates a successful reinvention, an impressive feat in an industry where typecasting can be career-ending. Yet, like any Hollywood narrative, success stories often come with complexities. After LA Law, which ended its run for her in the early 1990s, Susan Dey faced a transitional period. Having checked off 2 crucial boxes, beloved teen icon and critically acclaimed adult performer, where would she go next? Even if you're an award-winning actress, the entertainment industry rarely hands out indefinite opportunities. Changing audience tastes, network priorities, and the cultural shifts of the mid to late 1990s presented new barriers. The decline of her career after her remarkable ride with LA Law, Susan Dey's acting trajectory took a measured, more subdued path. It's important to clarify that decline in Hollywood doesn't always point to personal failings or a lack of professional discipline. Often, it signals that an individual's priorities have shifted, or the industry itself has outpaced the kinds of roles an actor wants to pursue. In Susan's case, she made fewer screen appearances as time went on. One of her last notable on-screen roles was in the series Third Watch in 2004, where she guest-starred for 2 episodes. Third Watch focused on the lives of police officers, paramedics, and firefighters in New York City, had gained a solid fan base for its gritty portrayal of emergency services. Susan played Dr. Breen, a character who appears briefly but leaves an impression for viewers who recognized her from earlier work. After this cameo, her presence in Hollywood slowed dramatically. So, why the quieter profile? Multiple factors likely converged. First, by 2004, Susan Dey had been in the public eye for nearly 3 decades. She might have simply grown weary of the non-stop schedule, the relentless media spotlight, and the never-ending negotiation over contracts, pay rates, publicity demands, and the hustle for roles. Second, the film and TV environment of the early 2000s was very different from the 1970s or 1980s. Audiences were hungry for reality television, and well-established stars from earlier decades sometimes found themselves relegated to cameo appearances unless they embarked on a strategic rebranding. For an actress who appeared to value authenticity and personal boundaries, the concept of rebranding might have seemed unappealing. Unlike other child or teen performers who welcomed the tabloid circus to maintain relevance, Susan Dey often steered clear of controversies and sensationalism. She had built a reputation as someone who was grounded, private, and selective in what she took on. If that meant fewer roles, fewer red carpet events, and less overall exposure, so be it. Furthermore, a decline in screen appearances doesn't always mirror the quality of someone's personal life. By all accounts, Susan Dey found plenty of fulfillment focusing on local involvements and personal commitments outside of Hollywood. She stepped away on her own terms, a decision that can often be the healthiest route for someone not interested in participating in the showbiz hamster wheel forever. Still, for fans who had hoped to see her continue acting in a major capacity, it may have felt abrupt. One minute she was raking in Golden Globe nominations as Grace Van Owen, and the next, she was hardly appearing in mainstream media. Yet that absence can tell us a great deal about an artist's inner compass. It suggests she reached a point where the personal cost of chasing roles might have outweighed the professional benefits. In an industry known for its mercurial nature and high burnout rate, stepping away with dignity might be the ultimate show of self-awareness. Community involvement and life after acting. Now, here's where the story of Susan Dey goes beyond Hollywood glamour and lights. Once she effectively left the fast-paced entertainment world, she channeled her energy into smaller-scale community projects and philanthropic endeavors, especially in upstate New York. This is a move that can surprise fans who might assume that every former star remains in Los Angeles or New York City, always on the lookout for the next big film or TV deal. But Susan chose a different route, putting her resources and celebrity to work in ways that directly enriched the lives of people around her. One compelling example is her involvement in local cultural events, like Battle of the Bands. From an outsider's perspective, it might seem like a small initiative compared to starring in a weekly network show. However, these types of grassroots competitions can have a meaningful impact on budding musicians, uniting community members around their shared love of music. For Susan, lending her name and face to local causes likely helped drive ticket sales, boost fundraising efforts, and generate excitement that might have been hard to achieve without a known figure attached. Engaging in local arts and culture can be both transformational and invigorating for a former celebrity. Instead of confronting the pressures of Hollywood, agent calls, casting interviews, paparazzi, she could stand face-to-face with neighbors, young artists, and small business owners. The personal connections cultivated in that setting can feel more genuine than anything experienced on a hectic Hollywood set. This shift in environment often proves rejuvenating for individuals who have spent years performing under constant scrutiny. Additionally, Susan Dey has indicated on more than one occasion that she hasn't completely ruled out returning to acting. However, she made it clear that any comeback would have to align with her principles and carry a meaningful message. While Hollywood and streaming platforms might produce a vast array of shows and films, not all resonate with deeper artistic or social values. Having achieved success and critical recognition in her earlier career, she's at liberty to be choosy now. She doesn't need to accept a half-hearted script or chase roles for mere visibility. Actors who have stepped away and returned for purposeful projects often find renewed satisfaction in the craft. They approach performances with a maturity and perspective they didn't necessarily have in their younger years. If Susan Dey decided to make a comeback via an independent film or a socially conscious series, it would stand as a powerful statement, proving that artistry can emerge from a place of sincerity, not just the pursuit of fame or a paycheck. Her decision to leave large metropolitan areas behind also appears consistent with her personality. We've seen countless celebrities who, after years of paparazzi-laden city life, choose to relocate to quieter communities for a sense of grounding. Unlike some stars who remain in million-dollar estates in Beverly Hills, occasionally complaining about lack of privacy, Susan Dey took tangible steps to regain control of her environment. In a smaller town, she can likely walk to the grocery store, chat with neighbors, and enjoy a type of anonymity that allows her to be seen as a person first, rather than a public figure. This move away from Hollywood also sheds light on a broader discussion about how former child actors or teen idols adapt once their initial wave of fame subsides. Many struggle with identity crises, financial trouble, or destructive behavior patterns. But Susan Dey seems to be among those who successfully preserved her well-being by refocusing her life outside the spotlight. By working with local charities, volunteering for community events, and openly discussing the possibility of returning to acting only for a truly meaningful role, she demonstrates a healthy relationship to her past achievements and her present life. For viewers who admire her, it's inspiring to see someone who once dominated primetime television pivot toward smaller, yet profoundly impactful, contributions. This speaks to a notion that success isn't one-dimensional. It isn't solely about national ratings or film openings at the local Cineplex. Success can also be measured by how one influences immediate surroundings, fosters creativity, and encourages community engagement. Moreover, her philanthropic side goes beyond music competitions. Though not as frequently advertised in the mainstream press, there have been numerous anecdotes and smaller news items detailing her involvement in medical center boards, women's advocacy projects, and educational programs. When a public figure offers genuine support, whether financially, by raising awareness, or simply by lending credibility to local causes, it can galvanize resources that would otherwise remain inaccessible. Hence, it's plausible that some fans might feel disappointed they no longer see Susan Dey on the red carpet or in blockbuster films. However, from another angle, this stage of her life might be more fulfilling for her personally, even if it garners less attention in tabloids or entertainment blogs. The trade-off appears worth it for someone who values privacy, community ties, and purposeful engagement over the glitz that initially defined her rise to fame. Reflecting on the arc of Susan Dey's career, when people look back on Susan Dey, many immediately think of Lori Partridge, the sweet and musically inclined daughter whose bright smile lit up millions of TV screens in the 1970s. Others will recall Grace Van Owen, the poised legal eagle from LA Law, who showed the world that the actress behind Lori had far greater range than comedic family fare might suggest. But in focusing solely on these high-profile eras, one might overlook the critical pivot she made in films like Looker or her lesser-known cameo appearances that signaled her willingness to explore edgier or more experimental material. Her readiness to tackle deeper thematic content indicated a keen interest in challenging herself rather than resting on the laurels of her teen star image. Success in Hollywood is a nebulous concept. Some measure it by award tallies, some by long-term fan devotion, and others by the ability to maintain steady work. Susan Dey's trajectory highlights yet another measure: personal fulfillment. A person can earn major accolades, like her Golden Globe win, yet still decide to walk away because the demands of the industry clash with personal goals or values. We also have to acknowledge that sustaining a career from the 1970s into the 2000s places her in a rare category of entertainers. Very few actors achieve consistent relevance across multiple decades, especially those who began as teenage icons. Even if she eventually chose a more private life, the longevity of her presence, in recognized TV hits and respectable film projects, reflects a lasting resonance with audiences. To younger viewers, it might feel like her career simply ended after third watch. But that doesn't capture the full story. She pivoted to a lifestyle of community service, local engagement, and reflective living, stepping away before the pitfalls that often ensnare former child stars had a chance to mar her legacy. In doing so, she stands as an example of how to gracefully exit a stage that no longer feels like home. Wrapping it up in sum, the Susan Dey story goes well beyond the Partridge Family. Her stint in Looker demonstrated an adventurous edge in her acting choices, aligning her with futuristic and unsettling themes that weren't typical for family sitcom veterans. Then, with LA Law, she elevated herself to new heights, proving she had the dramatic chops to hold her own in a competitive, critically acclaimed series. When she finally chose to scale back her Hollywood engagements, it wasn't due to scandal or meltdown. It was a deliberate move rooted in a desire for a different pace of life, one that allowed her to foster a close-knit bond with her community and contribute to the arts at a grassroots level. For fans, the lack of constant news about her can be bittersweet. On one hand, we miss the thrill of seeing her in high-profile roles, but on the other, we can't help but admire the agency she's taken over her own journey. In an environment that often devours personal boundaries, forging a separate identity is an accomplishment all its own. It's worth mentioning that many successful actors have periodically returned after long hiatuses, drawn by a script or a cause that reignites their passion. If Susan Dey ever finds that one perfect role, we might see her again on our screens, this time with the maturity, depth, and life experience that can illuminate a role in ways a younger performer simply couldn't. Until then, we can appreciate the legacy she's already given us, from comedic teenager in a painted bus to a commanding presence in a busy Los Angeles law firm, and finally, to a philanthropic figure making real connections in her local sphere. Relationship with David Cassidy now. This is one of those The Partridge Family tidbits that fans have been curious about for decades. David Cassidy, at the height of his fame, was a heartthrob with legions of screaming fans. Susan Dey, likewise, had thousands of admirers. Their on-screen chemistry led many viewers to ship them as a real-life couple, so learning that they dated, even briefly, was the stuff of fan fantasies. However, David's explanation that he saw Susan more as a sister is both surprising and not so surprising. On-screen siblings who spend long hours filming together might develop relationships that are more familial in nature, no matter how strong the initial attraction. The bond formed under those circumstances can blur the lines between familial love and romantic interest. If David truly felt a brother-sister dynamic, it certainly would have been difficult to sustain a real, romantic relationship. Still, fans have often speculated that David's explanation in his autobiography was somewhat harsh, especially phrasing it as disgusting to kiss her. It seems likely he was trying to emphasize that the emotional dynamic was off rather than attacking Susan personally. But because David Cassidy was known for frank talk, his words could come across as blunt or hurtful. On Susan's side, she never publicly delved too deeply into the details of that relationship. Her private nature likely meant she accepted his viewpoint and moved on without fueling any media speculation. Yet, the heartbreak or disappointment she might have felt was possibly overshadowed by her stoic way of dealing with private matters. As fans, we can only glean so much from public statements, but it's undeniable that whatever transpired left a bit of a mystery in its wake, much like many aspects of Susan's life. Marriage and personal life. Susan's second marriage to Bernard Safransky in 1988 marked a pivotal moment in her personal life. Being married to a television producer might have provided a sense of familiarity and mutual understanding of the entertainment business, both the perks and the pitfalls. Their decision to move to the northern Catskills region in New York underscores that desire for a more laid-back lifestyle, away from the frenzy of Hollywood. The Catskills, known for its beautiful landscapes and smaller towns, likely offered them a sense of tranquility and close-knit community that contrasted sharply with the high-pressure environment of Los Angeles. It's also noteworthy that Susan served on the board of the Women's Treatment Center at the UCLA Medical Center, indicating that she did not sever all ties with the West Coast. Board membership for such a vital institution points to her deep commitment to addressing issues like abuse, trauma, and mental health. The synergy between her philanthropic endeavors in New York and her ongoing influence in Los Angeles reflects a balanced approach, using her platform in both regions for meaningful work. Her co-narration of a documentary on campus assault against women with Corbin Bernsen is yet another highlight that shows how strongly she felt about women's safety and advocacy. This specific cause is incredibly timely, and remains so, speaking to a broader cultural conversation about consent, victim support, and institutional accountability. For someone who had built her reputation in a family-oriented show and a legal drama, speaking out about serious societal issues illustrates that her interests went far beyond acting roles. She sought to leverage her fame for social good. A life with no regrets. I have no regrets. It's a statement that can ring hollow for some celebrities, but in Susan Dey's case, it feels completely genuine. Unlike many stars who struggle to let go of the limelight, Susan made a conscious decision to step away from Hollywood, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She got a front-row seat to Hollywood's highs and lows early on, and in the end, she decided it wasn't for her. Instead of chasing the next big role, Susan redirected her energy into meaningful causes. She used her platform to advocate for issues she cared about, including women's rights and victim support. She didn't just lend her name to causes, she was hands-on. She even co-narrated a documentary about campus assaults, bringing attention to an issue many ignored at the time. But stepping away from Hollywood didn't mean disappearing. Susan remained engaged with the world, just on her own terms. She built a peaceful life in upstate New York, immersing herself in community work and cultural initiatives. One of her most notable efforts was helping organize and promote a local Battle of the Bands competition, an event designed to celebrate young musicians. In interviews, she spoke about the deep sense of connectedness she felt in her community, how being part of something bigger than herself brought her fulfillment in ways Hollywood never could. She hasn't completely closed the door on acting. If the right role comes along, she's open to it. But for Susan, it would have to be something truly meaningful, something that resonated with her values and had a real message to share. It's clear that for her, acting was never about fame or attention, it was about storytelling, about making an impact. Her time in Hollywood may have been shorter than some expected, but it was never wasted. From her early success on The Partridge Family to her more mature roles in LA Law, she left behind a body of work that still resonates with fans. Even her collaborations with John Ritter, Sunset Limousine, 1983, and The Comeback Kid, 1980, captured a sense of lighthearted fun that defined 1980s television. While these weren't groundbreaking films, they carried a nostalgic charm that fans still appreciate today. Looking at her life now, it's easy to see why she has no regrets. She lived on her own terms, left Hollywood when she was ready, and found happiness in ways that many former child stars never do. Unlike some stars who keep trying to relive their glory days, Susan Dey moved on, and she seems happier for it. Conclusion: Susan Dey may have stepped away from the spotlight, but her impact on Hollywood and her community remains undeniable. Whether it was through her unforgettable performances, her advocacy work, or her deep connection to the people around her, she proved that she was more than just a pretty face, she was a force to be remembered. What are your thoughts on Susan Dey? Do you believe her life was as picture-perfect as it appeared, or do you think there's more to the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our other celebrity nostalgia stories. See you in the next one.